Hi guys, thank you for bearing with me with this. Apologies again, but we'll make do, I suppose. So this first lesson that we're going to do in this triple is lesson 17, all about predation. In your books, it's page 174. The numbers at the bottom of mine are a little bit skew because this is inserted as a PDF. Whatever. Right, let's get started. So predation by itself is a very simple topic, but we need to start with having a think about how we study predation. And for this, we have to rely on what we call an ecologically valid setting. Okay, and if you're not sure what that means, because I know that some of you don't do your psychologies and your subjects that require sampling. So an ecologically valid setting is the extent, and I'm just going to write it in here, the extent to which the experimental findings, and I'm just going to write EXPT for experimental findings, can be generalized to real life. And this is a bit like making sure that your sample is representative and stuff like that, but this is more for looking at the way that organisms interact with each other. So it's related to the realism or the immersive nature of the experimental settings. And often, if we're going to have a look at predator-prey, we want to do it in the wild instead of doing it in a lab. And there are a few reasons for this. So a downside, so a negative of lab-based investigations, is that actually the preys or the prey organisms are exterminated. And extermination is a bit like extinction. We just remove all of the organisms of that particular type. So the prey are exterminated by the predators, and that's generally to do with the fact that we are in a confined space. Okay. However, if we have an ecologically valid, and that's what the EV stands for, then we have a much more reliable and representative response rate. So in the ecologically valid setting, we're more likely to have a variety of habitats. And each of those habitats is great because it offers opportunities for the prey organisms to hide or to escape. Potentially the prey organisms are better adapted in some situations or some ecosystems than the predators. And therefore, with this hide and escape or the better adapted, there is a reduced likelihood of that extinction event. Okay, so it's much more likely that this is the situation that's happening in nature as opposed to that I'm going to hunt you, I'm going to kill you, end. And here we see a really common graph. We've discussed this already in lesson, but we need to describe and explain the relationship between predators, their prey, and its effect on population size. It says use the graph over leaf, but on my version we've got it below. So let's start firstly with our describe. Okay, so we know what happens. We know that the predators eat the prey. The effect of this is that we get a reduced prey population size. So reduced prey pop. But that in turn has an effect of reducing the amount of prey available. Okay, and that is our resource that we discussed in yesterday's lesson looking at competition. So if we've got less prey available, then we end up with an increase in intraspecific competition. And this is again that competition between individuals of the same species. So increased intraspecific competition in the predator population. Obviously, we know with any type of competition that we are going to have, as a result, a reduced population in the predators because few are able to kind of survive, and the fewer that we have surviving because of that reduced resources is due to the fact that we have a reduced reproductive success. Reproductive success, and or generally just reduced availability of food for survival. So we said yesterday that food doesn't necessarily just directly increase the population. There's that whole lack of starvation, reaching sexual maturity. But if you've not got the food, then there's just starvation. And you just end up reducing your population that way. So reduced availability of food. I'm not going to write in starvation there. You get the gist. But this in turn has an effect of, with reduced predator populations, an increase in prey populations. So an increase in prey population as the reduced predators means they're not being eaten. And as we've seen, and as I've just alluded to, those bigger populations are going to have an increased likelihood of reaching sexual maturity. I'm going to put sexual maturity, and therefore they're going to be able to survive, reproduce, etc. Obviously then what we see is that as the prey increase, there's more food available for the predators, so they in turn have an increased likelihood of reaching that sexual maturity and increasing the populations that way. And what we see with our graph is that there is a very similar trend between the prey organisms, okay, so these peaks here where my arrows are, and then in the prey populations as well. And if you're looking at this graph quite carefully, you might notice that even though, yes, they follow the same patterns in terms of peaks and troughs, but the predators happen after a lag, there are always fewer predators than prey. And this is for a few reasons. Mostly it's that the transfer of biomass from prey to predators is not 100% efficient. So you require more prey organisms per predator than you do for the prey organisms to eat. Normally we're talking about a herbivore that then gets preyed on. Okay, so the transfer of biomass is inefficient. And as a result, the carrying capacity of your ecosystem, of your environment, is reduced for those predators because they're never going to have as much energy from those prey organisms as you expect them to have. But thankfully, in nature, our populations aren't this reliant on each other. So now we're thinking about why, in natural ecosystems, the fluctuations in predator and prey populations may not be as severe as the graph suggests. So instead of going up, down, massive peaks and troughs, we could end up instead with a much shallower kind of curve. Obviously, you're still going to get those peaks and troughs, but they aren't ever going to be as severe. And this is because normally the transfer of energy, so our food chains, is not linear. And that is to say, that we don't have the prey passing energy on to the predator, and that is it. That's generally not the case. Instead, what we see in lots of ecosystems is that we have alternative prey organisms. Okay, so a predator might have multiple sources of food that they can eat at varying times, and therefore that kind of load of being eaten, if you like, from the prey is shared between all of those different species. So the transfer of energy is not linear, and instead we see food webs rather than food chains. And remember, with these food webs, sorry, that means that predators have more than one, so greater than one prey normally. Right? They're not that picky. If they're going to survive by eating, they'll probably eat anything. Therefore, the prey numbers are less likely to be significantly affected. By predation. And when I say the prey are less likely, I'm talking about their population size. But obviously, again, this is hypothetical. So yes, the predators are going to have lower numbers than the prey. The prey are going to be eaten by the predators. The predators have got lots of different prey organisms. But sometimes things happen that completely demolishes the populations of both predator and prey at the same time. And there are a few examples that you need to know happen in varying natural ecosystems. And the first one is a biggie. It is disease. If it's a new disease, so a novel disease, then there is a high chance that neither type of organism has developed any form of resistance or memory cells. And remember, this is an opportunity for them to bring in topic 3, not even topic 3, bring in topic 2, my bad. And the diseases are particularly going to impact populations with a low genetic diversity. So low genetic diversity, most affected. Because if everyone's the same, you're going to wipe everyone out, aren't you? And then we've got a rapid change in things like our abiotic factors. And I'm talking more specifically about the climate. And where we see the change in climate is that we see a change in selection pressures. Obviously, we know that with a change in selection pressure, we're going to end up with some form of selection. So selection arises, and generally this is probably going to be directional selection as opposed to stabilizing. So we're talking about here population crashes. Directional or disruptive is how we see the changes in population after a massive problem. Okay, stabilizing selection is where our environment is stable. This is a change that then causes some form of diversity to be advantageous. So we've got that directional, or we've got the disruptive selection. But remember that both of these have the effect of potentially beginning evolution of the new species. Thankfully, that is this first lesson over. You have got an application task here relating to a graph of population sizes of the Canadian lynx and the snowshoe hare. This is a common example that they would use in the exam, but remember they can pick any different type of organism. Please have a go at looking at the data. I recognise that the graph on page 170 is a bit skew width. So what I'll do is I'll finish this video here. So you can pause the video now and just have a look at this graph when it comes to it on page 178. But please make sure you have had a go at those questions. I will put the answers up on Teams for you as well, in addition to the link for this lesson. Thanks, guys. Bye.